First up on Ag Etc., Jim Schroyer and Romolo Lolato are giving tips on how to control wheat streak mosaic now to prevent some headaches in the upcoming growing season. Then Jim Schroyer and Jeff Whitworth are looking at bugs, specifically those invading your soybeans, what they look like and what you might still be able to do to control damage yet this year. And if you're past your treatment date, what to keep in mind for the next growing season. Closed captioning brought to you by Ag Promo Source. Together we grow. Learn more at agpromosource.com. This segment brought to you by Kansas Regenerative Medicine. Your stem cells, your health, your life.
Hi, I'm Jim Schroyer, and with us we have Dr. Romolo Lolato, our Extension Wheat Specialist. Romolo, we had a really wheat streak mosaic problem this past year. What are some tips that producers can use to combat wheat streak?
Jim, definitely this year was a real outbreak of wheat streak mosaic. We saw yield losses on the state level as far as 6% or more, depending where we were. So some of the things that producers need to be thinking about are, besides controlling volunteer wheat, which is our first one strategy, they can work with planting date.
Okay.
It's important for us to remember that a wheat that is planted early, it can act just as a green bridge, just like a volunteer would, right?
Right.
Obviously, it wouldn't be there growing for the entire summer, but if it's planted, say, late August, early September, it can act as that green bridge for the wheat kernel mite to survive on.
And some producers like to plant early because they're going to graze it.
Yes, so that's another question that we get pretty often is, what if I'm grazing the wheat? And planting early, indeed, it will increase forage production. We have several studies showing that planting a couple weeks earlier will increase as much as 1,000 pounds per acre of dry matter in that field. But it's important for us to have that balance, not plant too early that the crop is going to be exposed to the wheat streak mosaic. For producers, for example, who go early September, that's very early, and the crop will be more exposed to the wheat kernel mite if we plant that early. Holding it back a couple weeks, even if you're going to go for grazing, can still provide good forage in the fall and decrease the risk of that wheat streak mosaic infection later on. So Jim, another thing that we need to acknowledge is that moisture availability many times is the key for producers out west. Whenever they have moisture available, if it is early September, they're going to go ahead and get the wheat planted. Now, we know that it can be an issue. If you look back this year, we had several fields in southwest Kansas and even northwest Kansas where producers who just missed the right planting date because of moisture didn't really have a stand or have half of a stand. So we need to acknowledge that many times producers will plant based on moisture. But if moisture is available early September and producers are going to go after it, trying to get a good stand, they need to be aware that they will be more exposed to the risk of getting wheat streak mosaic later on. Because that early planted crop, it's going to act just like a green bridge or just like a volunteer wheat would. So final tip here is that it would be very important for producers to get that volunteer wheat controlled at least 2 weeks prior to that new wheat emerging. So remember that we need two weeks without a living host for that wheat kernel mite to really not infect our following crop, or our following wheat crop.
And what about distance away?
Oh, distance away, our research showed that that volunteer wheat as far as half a mile or more can still, because of the winds that we have in Kansas, they can still infect a field of wheat. So definitely at least half a mile to a mile need to be controlled.
Romolo, thanks a lot for those tips.
Thank you, Jim.
Ag Promo Source is a unique group of marketing specialists with one mission: help your ag business grow. Each affiliate has their own area of expertise, and they work together to bring you advice, products, and services. To get started, visit agpromosource.com. Ag Promo Source. Together we grow.
Valley Vet Supply is devoted to providing information and professional quality products at reasonable prices.
Valley Vet Supply.
Soil is the life of a farm, and for 25 years, SureCrop Liquid Crop Nutrition has helped growers produce abundant quality crops while preserving and improving the soils they steward. SureCrop offers complete soil and plant analysis with cropping recommendations, delivery direct to your on-farm storage, and quality crop nutrition custom blended for your field. Choose SureCrop for the assurance of excellence for your soil. Call today or visit their website for more information.
Next time you see a beautiful field of corn, reach out and thank the farmers who work tirelessly to raise corn for livestock feed, renewable fuels, and exports to feed a growing world population. The farmers on the Kansas Corn Commission work for Kansas Corn with grower-funded checkoff dollars that support foreign and domestic market development, research, promotion, and education to expand opportunities for Kansas farmers. To learn more, visit kscorn.com.
This segment brought to you by Kansas Wheat. Learn more at rediscoverwheat.org.
Hi, I'm Jim Schroyer, and with us today we have KSU Extension Entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Dr. Whitworth, glad to have you.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
Let's talk about defoliators of soybeans, and there's one in particular that's a real nasty one.
Yes, there are. There are a lot of defoliators in soybeans. Apparently, they're very succulent to a lot of different insects, but the number one defoliator probably across the soybean belt is the bean leaf beetle. The bean leaf beetle overwinters as an adult, and it overwinters in alfalfa or weeds or wherever. And it hangs out waiting for those first little soybean plants to start germinating in the spring. As soon as they start germinating, the adults move over and start feeding, i.e. defoliating, on the soybeans as seedlings. Those are the first calls we get in the spring because the bean leaf beetle adult will feed very characteristically, causing round or oval holes in the leaves. It doesn't take too many to make a lot of defoliation in the spring because those plants are small. Generally, that defoliation won't hurt too much, but it depends on how many you have, how many you're feeding on them, and the growing conditions of the soybean plants.
Right, sometimes the soybean can outrun them.
Yes, usually it can. Usually the soybean plants are very resilient at overcoming a lot of defoliation, especially early on during the vegetative stages. The problem with the bean leaf beetle then after that, those adults will feed on the foliage for a while, then they'll go around and lay eggs at the base of the plant. And the baby or the larval stage of the bean leaf beetle will feed on the root systems of the soybean plant. A lot of guys don't realize that. So if you're out and you have some what looks like weak spots or stressed parts in your field, go out and pull those plants up. Lots of times there'll be little white larvae hanging off the roots. The bean leaf beetle larval stage looks very much like a corn rootworm larva. So they're really hard to distinguish other than their host. The bean leaf beetle feeds on soybeans. Corn rootworms only feed on corn roots. But they can stress the plants depending upon how many are. Then that generation will emerge as an adult, and what we're seeing right now this time of year is the second generation adult. They will feed on the leaves, causing a lot more defoliation, which again, the plants are pretty resilient at overcoming that defoliation, but what can be risky is when they start feeding on the pods, because the bean leaf beetle adult will feed on the pod, not the seed within the pod, but they will feed on the pod themselves. Now they'll feed on the leaves also. They'll feed on any succulent part of the plant.
Is there any particular part of the plant, foliar-wise, the upper part, lower part, or are they indiscriminate on where they feed on the leaves?
That's a good question. They'll feed on the most succulent part of the plant,
which
so the upper part of the plant. So they'll feed on the flowers as they're flowering. They'll feed on the leaves as they're putting on new leaf tissue, or they will feed on the pod as long as those pods are nice, green, and succulent. Once they start to turn a little bit yellow, they won't feed on them anymore.
Okay, so what about control?
Exactly. Early season seed treatments will work, but they only last for about 3 weeks. So this time of year, those seed treatments are dissipated. You need to consider treating. So our treatment threshold is about 1 bean leaf beetle per row foot. Go out and sample several different places in the field. And if you have 1 bean leaf beetle adult per row foot, you might consider an insecticide application. And if you do,
go ahead.
You want to make sure you use enough carrier to get to where the insects are, because as you can see, there's a lot of canopy out here, and it has to penetrate that canopy to get to the insect.
So where are we talking, 20 gallons?
We always recommend the more the merrier.
Okay.
You know, yes, 15 to 20. If you're using a ground rig, if you're using an aerial applicator, the more you can get them to use, the better off you are as far as penetration goes.
You use a net to?
Yes.
Okay.
We like to use a net to go out and detect the presence of the insects. A lot of guys, these are very easy to use. You just go out and swing the net. If you have bean leaf beetle adults, or if you have any of the other insect pests in soybeans, catch them in your net, and then go back and do your counts as far as how many per row foot or how many per 3 row feet.
Jeff?
Yes.
Thanks always.
My pleasure.
Bill Rischel here in North Platte told me about Kansas Regenerative Medicine, and after talking to Dr. Pope, we did a lot of reading and researching, looking on the internet about it. I guess the thing that impressed me is that he told me, he said, if we don't think it's going to help you, we're not going to do it. I'm a former athlete, played college basketball, had some severe trauma on the right ankle. This brace is what I had to wear all the time. Now I don't wear this during the day. That's a real improvement for me. Encourage anybody that's interested to go down and do a consultation with them.
This segment brought to you by SureCrop, liquid crop nutrition delivered right to your farm.
Hi, I'm Jim Schroyer, and with us we have Dr. Jeff Whitworth, our Kansas State Extension entomologist. Jeff, thanks for being with us.
Yes, my pleasure.
Jeff, we got some defoliation here on the canopy. We've talked about bean leaf beetle, but let's talk about the other defoliators. There's a bunch of them.
There are a bunch of defoliators in soybeans. Apparently soybeans are very attractive to a lot of different insects as far as leaf feeding goes, because as you can see here, there is a lot of it going on. Like I said, the first pest we normally see in soybeans feeding on the leaves is the bean leaf beetle. After that, there's a whole host of insects that come about depending upon the season and depending upon the year. Generally speaking, the second pest we see in soybeans feeding on the leaves is a green clover worm. And generally that starts in southeast Kansas and moves across the state. I can always tell when we're starting to see the green clover worms because I start getting calls from southeast Kansas. The thing is, they don't overwinter in Kansas, so it's when those moths come up and start laying eggs. And the green clover worms, in 2016, we probably had more than I've ever seen before. Probably 75% of the soybean fields in the state were sprayed for green clover worms. They are serious defoliators. They can, the nice thing about green clover worms, they're really easy to control if you decide you have to control them. And also there's a white fungus in Bavaria bassiana. It's the same fungus that controls chinch bugs sometimes. It will help control green cloverworm populations once they get to a certain point. The problem with that is there's a lag time between the green cloverworm and the white fungus actually killing enough of them to make a difference as far as the defoliation goes.
Otherwise, though, until that happens, you're going to have that field be skeletalized like it is right here.
Yes, that green cloverworm, they'll have 2 or 3 generations in Kansas. So that first generation is usually not as big as the second or the third generation, but they can, as you can see, they can do considerable defoliation. And then on top of that, you have grasshoppers. Grasshoppers come in usually mid-July, and they'll start feeding on the leaves. Then you have the bean leaf beetle will feed on the leaves also. But then you have, in this year, in 2017, what we saw is an outbreak of thistle caterpillars or painted ladies.
They're the same thing.
The thistle caterpillar turns into the painted lady as an adult. Those are migratory. They don't overwinter in Kansas either, but this year the first generation was about normal, but the second generation, which we're just seeing the end of, it's more than I've ever seen as far as densities go throughout the south central and the north central part of the state. Those are also defoliators. Now what they do is they will web up the leaves. So if you see this webbing here, yes, that's where the caterpillar has fed and it has now pupated. And they'll pupate in a very characteristic chrysalis that hangs off the leaf, and then they take off and fly away, I hope. Again, we're just now seeing this adult generation emerge. I don't know if they're going to lay eggs again this year or hopefully head south for the winter, but they are migratory. So you have bean leaf beetles feeding on it, you have green clover worms, you have thistle caterpillars or painted ladies, and
Grasshoppers.
you have grasshoppers. You always have grasshoppers in Kansas on all the crops. So they're adding to the mix. So once you get up to the 40 to 50% defoliation in the early reproductive stages of the soybeans, that's when you may want to consider an insecticide application. The best way to go out and see what the defoliators are is take your sweep net, sample to see what's there, and then if you have any, go out and do the actual treatment threshold counts where you do shake the plant over 1 row foot or 3 row feet or whatever it is in several places in the field. And that will tell you how many you have and whether it's going to justify an insecticide application or not.
Jeff, thanks as always.
Hey, my
Appreciate it.
pleasure.
The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan is rediscovering ways to get improved varieties and new genetics in the hands of farmers faster. Grower-led and checkoff-funded research initiatives are bringing about positive change. This grassroots leadership provides a strong voice in Topeka and Washington, D.C. Now is the time to partner with Kansas Wheat in moving wheat forward. Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Farmers investing in their future and yours. Log on to rediscoverwheat.org.
Grain sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org. This segment brought to you by Kansas Corn. Learn more at kscorn.com.
Hi, I'm Jim Schroyer, and with us we have Dr. Jeff Whitworth, our extension entomologist. And Jeff, this time of year, you're probably getting calls about critters feeding on the pods.
Yes, the soybean pod feeding is just getting started throughout Kansas, and that's something we always worry about.
That's an August, September thing, right?
It usually is, yes. And maybe even a little bit later with the double crop soybeans we have. It just depends on the growing season. But that's where the insects are feeding right on the marketable product.
Right.
And that's where you can lose yield very quickly as opposed to the defoliation, which is not as
severe,
in my opinion. Yeah, not as dramatic. But anyway, the pod feeding, the two main pod feeders that we worry about throughout the state year after year is a bean leaf beetle adult, which feeds on the pod itself, versus the corn earworm larvae, or sometimes it's called the soybean podworm, or the sorghum headworm, or the cotton bollworm. Same species.
Same critter.
Same critter. They'll feed in all of those different crops, but it will feed on the seed or the bean within the pod. So if you're out looking at your field and you're trying to determine which is causing a problem, and that's important, that you determine which it is. If it's just scraping and the pod on the outside of the pod and doesn't go right for the seed, that's a bean leaf beetle adult. You're probably not going to see the insect itself feeding on it, but that's indicative of the bean leaf beetle adult. If there's one hole right where the seed is, or two or three, that's probably the corn earworm larvae. Now, the reason that's important is because the corn earworm larval stage is the only stage that's going to feed on the seeds within the pods. And that stage is only going to last like 2 weeks. The bean leaf beetle adult, that's going to feed on the pods, not the seed, but the pod itself. But they're going to be out here feeding until they overwinter, or until the pods turn yellow and they're too hard and too dry for them to get any sustenance out of. So if you're out checking to see which is which, if you find a lot of seed feeding and you go out with your sweep net and you can't find any larvae, corn earworm larvae or soybean pod worms, whichever you want to call them, that probably means they're pupating. And that's probably old damage. So you don't want to treat, okay? Because after that, it's going to be 2 to 3 more weeks before another generation comes on. So it's all about timing when you treat for insecticide.
But you do have, you said for about 10 to 12 days they're pretty active, but then you've got another generation, so you could actually have 2 or 3 weeks.
Yes, that's what I say. Those larvae will pupate, and it'll be a couple of weeks while they pupate and lay eggs before they larvae start feeding again. So the later the beans are planted, the more you have to worry about later in the season for corn earworms feeding on the seed within the pod.
How about control?
You make sure you use plenty of carrier. They're easy to kill because they're up in the top part of the canopy, but you want to make sure you use enough carrier to penetrate the canopy to get to where the insects are. These are all contact insecticides,
Right.
so they have to contact the insect.
Jeff, appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Hello friends, I'm Ernie Rodina.
And I'm Dawn Dawson with the Better Horses Radio Show.
For over 9 years, we've been bringing the Better Horses Radio Show to markets all across the Midwest. We talk about God, lots about horses.
We talk about cows, we talk about horse health, we talk to top trainers, and we even talk about Roy Rogers.
We're having a blast with Better Horses Radio Show and would love to take it to a market near you.
So visit our website at betterhorsesradio.com and let us or your local radio station know you'd like to hear it in your area.
The Better Horses Radio Show is unbelievable.
This segment brought to you by Kansas Soybean Commission. Progress powered by Kansas farmers.
Hi, I'm Jim Schroyer, and with us we have Dr. Jeff Whitworth, Extension Entomologist. And Jeff, this time of year, we've got a lot of pod feeders. I know there are two main ones, but we got a couple that are not so obvious.
Yes, we do have a lot of insects going after soybeans throughout their growing season. The ones that maybe are not as obvious, number one, are the stink bugs. Stink bugs are very cryptic, they're very well camouflaged, plus they're really shy. The problem with stink bugs, when guys go to sample them, the female adult stink bug will lay clusters of eggs. So she may lay 25, 50 eggs here and fly a short ways and lay 25 or 50 more here and there. And then those nymphs come out. So if you go to sample and you sample in that one location, you may pick up a whole bunch of stink bugs and you get all excited and think your whole field is going to be overrun by stink bugs. But if they're the nymphs, that's just the way they come out of the egg stage, and they hang around on the leaf that the female deposited the eggs on for a while. After the second or third molt, they will disperse and go out into the field. That's when you really need to get out and sample. The best way to go out, in my opinion, is to use a sweep net. Go out because you can cover a lot of area quickly. You can detect what's out there. Doesn't mean it's going to show you whether it's a treatable level or not, but it allows you to detect what insects are in your field. So the best way to go out and sample several different places, if you pick up any stink bugs, then go back and do a row foot or 3 row feet of shaking the plant over the row or over a drop cloth and counting how many insects fall out. That will give you your treatable level, your if there is such a thing.
What kind of damage does the stink bug have?
The stink bug has a sucking mouth part, so like a little injector needle. So when they first emerge from the egg, they're very small. Those little mouth parts are very tender, and they will feed on any plant part, or most any plants actually. So they're not just looking for the bean within the pod, but they will feed on whatever they come across that's succulent that they can get some nourishment out of.
Do they inject any kind of a toxin?
They don't.
They do not.
The problem is, though, they will crawl up to the plant, and as the flowers start to mature and you start to get these young succulent beans setting on, that's pretty attractive to the stink bugs. So they'll start feeding on those. The problem with stink bugs, they leave no telltale sign that they're feeding there, so you have to find the insect itself. Okay, but usually when the guys realize they had a stink bug infestation is at the end of the year when they go in and they were expecting 100 bushel beans and they got 60, and you start looking at the seed and they're shrunken, or
the pods kind of shrivel sometimes too.
The pods can, but generally it's the seed within that will have a wrinkled seed coat or be kind of shrunken. That's indicative of stink bugs feeding on it earlier. Once they start to mature, it becomes too hard and they can't get any nourishment, they'll move on. But they move up the plant to the more succulent seeds within.
What about the little stem borer
Right.
here?
The other problem we have throughout north central and the western part of the state is the Dectes stem borer. It gets in soybeans and sunflowers. It will start causing this deadening of petioles starting in August. Yes. As that larva moves inside the plant, and then the larva will bore its way down to the base of the plant, where just before harvest, usually, it will girdle the plant, and then lots of times the plant will fall over, so it's unavailable to harvest. There's really nothing we can do about it now other than if you have a 60% infestation, you need to harvest as soon as you can before it does lodge.
Well, Jeff, as always, I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Closed captioning brought to you by Ag Promo Source. Together we grow. Learn more at agpromosource.com.